So people say that hallucinations in artificial intelligence systems, large language models, are really such a problem when we want to make a practical use of them, especially when it comes to factual things. Because if you ask ChatGPT some factual questions, and if it comes with a wrong answer, based on hallucinations, that would be terrible. So hallucinations are nuisance. But on the other hand, I think that hallucinations could be useful. And when I was thinking about that, when I was running this morning, I was somehow led to thinking about near-death experience. This is something that I was interested in when I was in the 20s, and for me, the near-death experience is, as a conclusion, I think they are illusions, and there's nothing, corresponding to reality in these experiences. However, it is very interesting that when people are in critical conditions, they have these hallucinations of right tunnels and man spreading his arms and looking at oneself from the ceiling, lying on the bed, and all these things. All these standard, typical descriptions of a near-death experience. I think these hallucinations are interesting because they represent expanding of the worldview. They are somehow perpendicular to what we experience in our daily lives, and if that is the case, I think hallucinations can be something that can augment our limited cognition about the worldview. And it seems to me that hallucination never happens on the practical dimension. For example, if you have a cup and you perceive that as a reality of the world, but you seldom hallucinate another cup next to that, because that is kind of redundant. So hallucinations are something that is always expanding the view of the world as we understand it. And I suspect that in the case of artificial intelligence systems, maybe the same is true. And so many people have argued probably that there might be some connections between hallucinations and creativity, and hallucinations and cognitive robustness, especially the former. And since hallucinations are something that is beyond what we perceive, as a matter of fact, it is clearly related to creativity. And the way that large language models come up with hallucinations is somewhat similar to how our brains come up with, creative ideas. We learn things from interactions with the world, and we, kind of make a statistical inference based on experience with the world. But when it comes to creativity, we try to, get away from that, boxed thinking. And that is when this argument about hallucinations being perpendicular to what we perceive practically becomes very interesting and important. And in a way, having hallucinations like that might contribute to the robustness of our cognition, because we need to think about the counterfactual as well as the factual when we try to make a robust judgment about the world. We need to have regrets from time to time, and in order to have regrets, research has shown that the orbitofrontal cortex, OFC, is involved in that. And when we have regret, we need to think of counterfactual world lines as well as factual world lines. So to imagine and compare what we could have done and what could have resulted from that is a very important aspect of counterfactual thinking. And that is a kind of hallucination. Of course, the signal-to-noise ratio of hallucinations is very low. Most of the time you don't get really great hallucinations. Most of hallucinations are, useless. And I suspect that in the case of artificial intelligence systems, large language models, the same is true. So most of the hallucinations would be useless. They would be just noise. But it's quite interesting to think whether we can make practical use of it in some ways and another. And that might be actually a grand challenge of artificial intelligence research. How can we make a practical and robust use of hallucinations coming from large language models? I think that's a really great challenge. And interestingly, in the case of visual artificial intelligence systems like Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, and DALL-E 2, and so on, hallucinations are useful. Hallucinations kind of enriches the picture that we get. Even in photorealistic pictures, hallucinations are fun and entertaining. So that's again related to my earlier argument about hallucinations being perpendicular to what we experience in practical sense, because otherwise they wouldn't be interesting so much. I mean, if hallucination is about just another cup beside one cup which is real and another cup which is illusory, that wouldn't be so interesting. So hallucinations are clearly about being perpendicular to the practical worldview, and by being perpendicular to our practical worldview and being wrong, being counterfactual, they can be of very interesting and creative use in visual artificial intelligence systems. Now, I think if we look back on the history of humanities, I think there have been some interesting cases about hallucination being very helpful and indeed critical and crucial in creativity. For example, Albert Einstein famously hallucinated about chasing light with the speed of light when he was 15, I think. And, so that was a hallucination that he had. Of course, that was a, kind of ridiculous hallucination. But actually, that led to his theory of relativity, this thought experiment, what Gedanken experiment, in which you chase the light with the speed of light, of course, which is not practical and which you can never do. But that was a very useful hallucination, and that was a really creative hallucination too. Of course, there's a really famous, case of the structure of Benden being created in a dream by August Kekulé, a chemist, and Kekulé dreamed of I think six snakes, was it? Robots, was it? And that suggested here to him the chemical structure of the benzene, the pentagon structure of the benzene, and that is a really interesting case of really interesting and useful. Not a pentagon, it's a six-figure. I forgot the name. Anyway, so that was a really creative hallucination by Kekulé, and then there was this hallucination by Haruki Murakami. Haruki Murakami famously had this conviction that he could write a novel while he was watching a baseball game in a stadium. And he writes about it, and this is really strange. Haruki Murakami remembers the exact moment when he had this inspiration that he could write a novel and he could be a novelist. And this was a hallucination. And probably, there could have been many, many youngsters who had that hallucination. So here, signal to noise ratio might be low again. But this particular youngster turned out to be Haruki Murakami. Well, that makes you think. There you are. I mean, there's something to be said about hallucination there. And Haruki Murakami's hallucination about being a writer in the baseball field might be considered epiphany, revelation of something essential and something that is very important in one's life. So hallucinations can sometimes be an epiphany. So could artificial intelligence systems, large language models, have epiphanies? Well, I think a really interesting thought, and one that is probably worth pursuing both scientifically and technologically. And so I have been thinking whether we could make a use of a creative and practical use of hallucinations in artificial intelligence systems, and I think there are some possibilities. As I said, like in the case of near-death experience, I think hallucinations are there to provide a perpendicular worldview, whether it is true or not, whether it is practical or not. In that sense, I do believe that hallucinations create things, and hallucinations contribute to the creativity and robustness of cognition, whether it is in the case of human brains or artificial intelligence systems, large language models like the ChatGPT.